Hello, everybody. Welcome. Come on in, get settled. We're very, very excited about today's event, which I'm going to introduce in a minute. But please, our insiders know the drill very well. But we are going to be exploring the 5 boroughs today from the comfort and safety of our homes, with the beginning of a great partnership that we are having with the Gotham Center for New York City History. We are going to be led today. I'll be in part of the conversation in and out, but we're also going to be led today by the president, the director of the Gotham Center, Peter Christian Eigner, along with, we're going to have some brief talks about programs that are happening this fall from Russell Shorto, author of the best-selling History of New Amsterdam, Island at the Center of the World, which is, as all of you know very well, a huge book on my favorites. I've put it on many reading lists. And Susan Goodyear, who is a historian of women's activism during the late 19th and 20th century. She is now working on a manuscript entitled Networks of Activism, Black Women in the New York Suffrage Movement. So we're going to get a taste today for some of the programs at the Gotham Center. We will be doing repeated programming with the Gotham Center moving forward, including a column that the Gotham Center will be doing on New York's editorial. So everybody say hello. And I'm going to say hello to a couple people before I turn it over to Peter. I do hear somebody's notifications going. If we could just mute those, just check to see if they are muted. I hear the boops. Not me, is it? No. All right. So Christopher from Staten Island, hello. Joshua, hello from Manhattan. Pete Tannen, hello from San Francisco. Judy from Brooklyn. Rachel from Croton on Hudson. Nancy from Tuckahoe. Kathy from the Jersey Shore. I grew up down there. Gareth, welcome from Wales. Always good to see you, Gareth. Nora from South Florida. Hello from Queens. Julie. Hello, Russell. Thank you for coming. Joe from London. Yvonne from the Upper East Side, and many others, some from Atlanta. But I'm going to let us get started and turn it over to Peter. Peter, please.
Thank you so much, Justin. And we're absolutely delighted to be partnering with Untapped New York and to be moving forward in these programs. Always good to be back with Susan and Russell as well. So I'm going to just wrap a little bit about the Gotham Center and who we are and what we do. I hope some of you all are familiar with us already, but you can find out more online at gothamcenter.org. The institution, if we're going to talk about the Gotham Center, we have to sort of talk about Mike Wallace, who was our founder and the advisory board chair. The center really began as a result of this book, which I'm sure the New York City history buffs in the room are familiar with. I've heard Mike talk about the backstory on this book for a bunch of times already. The short version of the story is that Mike had been doing his PhD under Richard Hofstadter, which I think is probably a name that's also familiar to many of you, at Columbia in the 60s, which, among other things, was this very dramatic period for the historical profession, in which, as a result of the various social movements going on, our understanding of American history really sort of radically expanded. And so Mike, being the editor of one of the journals that was publishing a lot of this research, decided to go about and create a new narrative history for the public that would introduce them to all this new historical research. I've heard him say several times that he spent about 10 years on the project and had about 3,000 pages and hadn't gotten out of the 1600s yet. And then at that point decided to, which I actually think is the truth. I'm not sure he's actually exaggerating that too much. So they decided to slim things down a bit with this, small little pocket-sized book, which remains the reference book for numerous scholars. The idea, essentially, was that there also should be a place in the city where the many scholars who are working on New York City history at all times, given the importance of the city to American history, which is one of the central sort of arguments of the book and of the center. We're one of the few places where we sort of in the habit of saying that New York isn't necessarily the center of the world, but it is the most important city to know the history of if you want to know the history of the United States, right? It is an exceptional city to the development of so many different areas of American life, contrary to the idea that it's somehow sort of an outlier, which is an idea that has its own history. So the idea was that we needed a place where we could get those scholars together to talk about this history, provide a network and a platform. And without going too much into details there, this was, a couple of years after we had had a scare with New York Historical Society potentially shutting down. So the City University of New York, the public university system, had just moved to its new headquarters at 34th and 5th. And the Gotham Center established itself under Mike's leadership. We set up a year-round public event series, which is still our anchor program. We provide sort of a platform for the best and most interesting new research, conversations with scholars. We often regularly also do panel discussions that bring scholars together to provide some historical perspective on the issues of the day. We also have a K-12 program that was established in Mike's time that takes that research into the classrooms, and a website that continues to grow that serves to be, or aims to be, a one-stop shop for all things New York City history. Justin, I'm sorry to interrupt the narrative here. I just want to, here we go. I want to move through the slides here. I know I'm got to be mindful of my time. It's so easy.
No,
take
your time. So you should be able to proceed using the arrow keys.
I'm not. Oh, there we go. Okay. So there we have Mike Wallace, and you can learn all about him and his many books. The Gotham book was now the first of a trilogy that Mike will be wrapping up. The second volume, Greater Gotham, came out a few years ago, and we are eagerly expecting the third to arrive. They're all equally large, so you might want to start lifting some weights in preparation. We have a list of all of our past events on the website, including the recordings from a mammoth undertaking that Mike carried forward the first year, gathering putting together over 100 panels on all aspects of New York City history that was commemorated by the mayor at the time of the city council's New York City History Week. You can still find those recordings online. The website, as I mentioned before, continues to grow in many ways. We now have 3 different podcast series, one of which, perhaps the best known, is Sights and Sounds. We were lucky enough to, or honored, to get an award from the Guides Association of New York City last year for this project that we do every year for Open House New York Weekend, where we gather leading scholars and experts, including Mr. Shorto, to talk about various sites in the city and their importance to the history of the city and organizations as well. One of the more recent podcasts we did was documenting the city's experience with COVID-19. And then we have a semi-weekly publication that now has, I think, somewhere in the area of 700 articles. And these are primarily original research. So you can see, we have hundreds of authors have now, I think, contributed by this point, and we are partnered with various institutions like Urban Archive and Newsella that get that information out to teachers as well. The most exciting project, or the one we'll be talking about today, is Gotham Ed. The Gotham Center does a suite of programming with research as well. We have a series of writing fellowships and things like that, but public education has really been the core of the mission at the Gotham Center. And for a long time, we've had folks that have come forward after the events that we put on and inquired whether they could learn more about these topics, right? And so Gotham Ed is really our attempt to provide a deeper dive for those who really want to get into the nitty-gritty on the history of the city. And there's a wide range of topics, of course. given the nature of New York City history. These things really go everywhere. So you'll see a list here of some of our past courses, history of women in New York City labor, the history of terrorism in New York City, history of Stonewall, Gilded Age New York, history of epidemics in the city. There's really something for everyone. So we're very excited about this project, and we've been very happy with the response that we've had so far. Some of the upcoming courses you'll see on the screen here, you can find them all at gothamed.com if you are interested. But I think at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Russell, who of course is the author of the national bestseller, Island of the Shore at the Center of the World, in addition to numerous other fine works. Russell will be teaching a course on the history of New Amsterdam next month, and we're delighted to have him, in addition to Dennis Micah, of course, at the Netherlands Institute. So I think, Russell, rather than me going on any further, why don't you tell us a little bit about what we're going to be learning in this class?
Sure. Thank you very much, Peter, and acknowledgments to Mike Wallace as well, the great Mike Wallace and the Gotham Center for hosting us. Thank you, Justin, and Untapped New York, and Susan. It's wonderful to be on this sort of preview panel with you. Justin, I don't have to do anything else right now. I can just start talking, right?
You can just start talking, and your arrow key should progress the slides forward. So
okay, and the slide, I just tossed some slides in there, and Peter, I'll let you manage those while I talk. So just to give you a little overview of the course that we're going to be offering, it's called New Amsterdam, Myth and Meaning in Gotham's Dutch Past. I'm co-teaching it with Dennis Micah, my colleague at the New Netherland Institute. It will be 6 Tuesdays from October 5th to November 2nd. What we're doing is for each of these 6 sessions, we're going to bring in a special guest who's truly an expert in that aspect of New Netherland history. And the first one is the expert in New Netherland, Charles Gehring, who since 1974 has been translating and publishing the 12,000 pages of documents that constitute the corpus of New Netherland records. This is the court cases and council minutes and correspondence that the Dutch and the many others who were living and working in and sailing into and out of New York Harbor wrote and compiled, and that's the real basis from which we know what we know about New Netherland, about New York's Dutch prehistory. So Charlie Gehring is we're going to kind of, with each of these experts, we're going to interview them, and the participants will have a chance to chime in and ask questions and so on as well. We'll interview Charlie about, we'll ask him to give an overview, first of all, of the West India Company, which was the organization that founded New Netherland. And we're going to ask him, we're going to zoom in on the Peter Schagen letter, which is kind of New York's birth certificate, which is written in 1626 in Dutch, handwritten, of course. And we'll use that to have Charlie give us a little bit of a primer in how you read 17th century Dutch handwriting, and to unpack it. You know, there's so much information in that document about that moment, really the moment that you might say of New York's birth. And then we're going to ask Charlie to talk about those 12,000 pages of documents that he has that he's devoted his life to, and what they comprise, and how information about that period in New York's history has been ever expanding as more and more experts come into the picture. In the next session, we are going to bring on Jaap Jacobs, internationally recognized authority on New Netherland. He's a Dutch scholar who's at St. Andrews University in Scotland. And we're going to ask him to go broad and narrow. So he's going to talk to us about New Netherland in the Atlantic world, you know, give us the big picture on what the Dutch were trying to do, and then to zoom in on the most famous, and some would say infamous, figure from New Netherland, Peter Stuyvesant. Jaap has been for many years working on what I'm sure will be the definitive biography of Stuyvesant. I have stopped, out of politeness, I've stopped asking him when it will be done. So if anyone dares to, they can ask. Andrea Mosterman will join us to talk about the issue of slavery in New Netherland. She is another Dutch scholar. She's at the University of New Orleans, and she has a new book, which is not quite out yet, called Spaces of Enslavement, A History of Slavery and Resistance in Dutch New York. She's going to talk about what it was about. I mean, there's a whole wealth right now of exciting new scholarship on this topic. Andrea and several other scholars have been working to identify who the first enslaved Africans were in New Amsterdam, how they got there, where they lived, their names, their identities, where they came from in Africa, their customs, how and when most of them got their freedom, which raises the very interesting question of, are we right to use the term slavery? Because to me, it feels like what was going on borrowed a lot of features from indentured servitude in Europe. And very interesting to me, I only recently discovered that the Dutch at the time did not use the term slavery or slaves. They talked about Africans or blacks. And then starting in the 19th century, when Americans began translating these records, they just swapped out the term slavery. So, we're going to talk to Andrea about what this even was, what the concept was. And we're going to look at the geography of Manhattan from their point of view, because once they were given freedom, they were given land as well. And so that your sense of Lower Manhattan kind of undergoes a bit of a change when you realize this was land that was owned by this African resident of New Netherland and then of New York. I'm going to speed it up here because I don't want to use too much time. We're going to go into Native Americans, looking at the geography of New Netherland from the Native American perspective. The northern reaches, you had the Iroquois, in particular the Mohawk people, the people of the Longhouse. You also had the Mohicans, who were very different culturally from them. The Europeans had to find their way between and among them. Around the New York City area, you had the people who scholars recently are using the term Munsee to refer to. Historically, they talked about the Lenape. So we'll talk about relations with Europeans of all these groups. In the next session after that, Dennis and I are going to talk about Amsterdam and New Amsterdam. New Amsterdam was in many ways a child of the city of Amsterdam. That city imposed its culture, its strategies, its business culture, its tolerance on the city. And of course, Amsterdam at that moment was booming, was in its golden age. The Dutch East India Company was founded. You had the concept of shares of stock that came into being, the first stock exchange. And Amsterdam was the center, really, of everything. It was kind of the Amazon of its time, this entrepot where you could get everything from cinnamon to sugar to microscopes to live tigers to books. It was the publishing capital of the world. So we're going to get into that connection and how that city, so Manhattan, New Amsterdam was this little kind of Wild West town, but it was plugged into the very heart of Europe. The last class is going to be on the legacy of all of this: architecture, cultural things, cookies, coleslaw, Santa Claus, place names, Harlem, Staten Island, you name it, Van Cortlandt Park, everywhere from Rhode Island to Cape May, New Jersey. And in terms of legacy, the big things, I think, that helped shape not only New York, but America: tolerance as a real thing, and also the limitations on it, and trade, how these things made us, New York and America, who we are. So I hope you will join us. And with that, Peter, I'll turn it back over to you.
That's great. Thank you, Russell. Susan, you've taught for us before. This is another version, an updated version of a fantastic course that you ran on a very exciting project that you're doing. You've done some program with us before. People are hopefully, we've got some Gotham alumni in the audience. They know you for your excellent books on the history of the suffrage movement in New York, which, as we all know, was pivotal to the passage of the amendment nationwide. But now you're doing some very interesting pioneering work on history of the African-American women that were involved in the movement, who we don't know too much about as yet. That will be changing thanks to you. So you want to tell us a little bit, please, about the course?
Yes. First of all, I do want to say thank you for letting me do this. This is some work that I'm extremely excited about, and because I get so excited, I want to talk about it all the time. And having this opportunity with Justin and with you, Peter, is really I really appreciate it. It's also nice to come after Russell and be a little bit. I can see the contrasts and some of the similarities. I am not going to be running this course with a lot of guest authors and speakers, which I would love to do, but this is work that's very much in its infancy, and so there's almost nothing on this topic when we get to the state level. There is increasingly some work that's being done at the national level. And when I started doing work on the suffrage movement, I actually started with anti-suffragists. And then I co-authored, so that was my first book. And then I co-authored a suffrage book with Karen Pistorello. And we divided our chapters, and I wrote the chapter on Black women in the suffrage movement. And as I did that, and we finished that book in 2017, which marks when New York women got the right to vote, I kept thinking that chapter on Black women is only just scratching the surface. There was a lot I didn't put in there. And so what I've been working on since is to try to, in some ways, create what I see as a trilogy of the suffrage movement in New York, but to really maybe not complete the work on suffrage in New York, but to add what I consider an incredibly important piece of the story. Now, the work that I'm doing is being informed all the time. And so the course as I see it now, as I taught it last year, and as I see it now, is continually evolving. I'm discovering new things every time I sit down to write. It's incredibly exciting, but it means that things tend to be a little bit flexible. They also are flexible because of the people who participate in the course. I've been very honored by people who have some sense of their own ancestors being involved in suffrage activism. And so that's also been a part of what's been going on. So it's in many ways the course is growing at the same time. So before I talk specifically about one of the people who's an important actor in this, I do want to say national studies are incredibly important. But what you cannot do with a national study is to see relationships and connections between the women, in my case, the women who are involved in the movement. You've got to kind of try to cover most states.
Right.
I don't need to do that. And so what I can do is to look at individual women, the networks they create, the people that they know, and how that works as a way of resisting the racism and sexism that they find in the larger society. So I want to start with talking a little bit about a place called Weeksville in Brooklyn. This was an African American community, and Sylvanus Smith and his wife Anne lived in that community. Now, I don't think they lived in any of these houses. These are the only, I think there are only 4 houses that are left from that era. But Sylvanus was a wealthy African-American man. He and his wife actually were descended of Native people, Native Long Island Native people, some white people, and some African people. And they were fairly well-to-do. And they had a whole lot of children, the eldest of whom was Sarah Smith. Now, Sarah went into the field of teaching. She had a 45-year career as a teacher and worked her way up to becoming a principal eventually. And she isn't totally representative of the African American women who got involved in the suffrage movement. She has her own unique aspects, but she is representative of the kind of woman who got involved in this kind of activism. She was a pioneer in her field, and many of the women that she drew into her circle were also pioneers. So, for example, her sister, so this is Sarah, and she founded a colored women's suffrage society in Brooklyn. She drew to her a number of other women, and some of these are her sister, pictured in the lower left, and her name was Susan Smith McKinney Seward. She was the first African American woman doctor in New York. And she continued to practice in the 1870s. She was founding a hospital that is today part of the hospital, the NYU hospital. Maritcha Lyons, above her, Maritcha Lyons is actually one of the historians, so to speak, of many of the women of her era. So that's how we know as much as we do about some of these women. Unlike Russell, we don't have the sources. We're finding the sources as we move through. Maritcha Lyons was also a teacher. She was a colleague of Sarah Smith, and she actually became a principal who had authority over both Black and white teachers. So again, a pioneer in her field. These 2 women on the left are part of this first generation of activists, pioneers in their fields. There are other women we'll learn about who are also pioneers in law and social work, but they're all connected through Sarah Smith Garnett. Sarah married, her second marriage was to Henry Highland Garnett, an African-American abolitionist. So she then took on his name. So these are part of the first generation. Now, Sarah Garnett really bridges another generation of women, like the woman on the on the right, who is Verena Morton Jones. Verena Morton Jones was the first African-American woman doctor. She was actually educated in Mississippi, but she moved with her husband to New York and got involved not just with Sarah Smith Garnett's suffrage activism, but also with people. She was on the board of directors for the NAACP. She was one of the founders of a settlement house. So she's involved in all of these areas. Plus she's being a doctor. So she had her patients to take care of. And so these women, what we begin to discover, and there are other networks that we look at out in Rochester, in Buffalo, a little bit out there, but we're centered in New York City because so much of what we can find out is about these women in New York City. And so what we begin with in the course itself is trying to understand why we don't know so much. What are the barriers to us knowing more about African American women's history, and how to change that, what we can do to learn more. And of course, the more we learn about it, the more we talk about it, the more we are able to learn, and the more that we spread this information out and about. So as I know, the way that the course is designed now, as I say, we begin with learning about some of the barriers, and then we get into more of the specific women and the kinds of work that they did, and then how their activism reaches out across the state and then begins to influence people at the national level. Sarah Garnett, for example, is involved in suffrage activism with the National Association of Colored Women. So a very influential woman in her time. So all of that stemming from New York City. So that's how it's going to look as I see it now, but I'm doing some real interesting research and writing on Sarah Garnett, and I'm really excited about what we are all going to learn during the course. I have one more picture I want to show you. This actually was on the cover of on a publication of the NAACP on the 1915 issue, and these are women, I think, who were involved with one of the sororities. I think he doesn't say, W.E.B. Du Bois doesn't really say, but the NAACP is a part of this supportive network of women and men that help to enfranchise women, not just here in New York, but much more broadly. So thank you, and I'm excited and look forward to questions and look forward to continuing this discussion.
That's great, Susan. Thank you.
All right.
Justin, we're at your mercy now. Fire away.
I like that. No, so thank you all. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Russell, for giving us a preview into those courses. I think one of the things I would invite everybody to do is please take the opportunity right now, if you have any questions for any of the instructors, or for Peter, or for myself. Actually, somebody asked a very good question in the chat, which I'll address in a minute. Please do so now. You can put them in the Q&A chat at the next to the chat tab, or put them right in the chat. I'm monitoring both. First off, Rachel had asked what the relationship was between the Gotham Center and Untapped New York, and it just so happens that this is an inaugural partnership event. Like I had mentioned in the beginning, Untapped New York is going to provide previews to some of the great courses that will be going on seasonally for the Gotham Center. As a matter of fact, Peter and I already have a follow-up program for October 19th with Martin Lund and Comics in New York, which I'm super excited about, because a lot of you know I got got into some of this business with comics in the beginning. But also, we Gotham Center will be doing either monthly or bi-monthly. I don't know if we finally
bi-weekly. I thought.
Oh, bi-weekly. That's right. We decided to go bi-weekly. You're a masochist.
Just trying to, yeah. Otherwise, I've got some angry authors I've got to talk to.
Yeah, right. You too. That will also give Gotham Center content out to our Untapped readership. So for those of you who are insiders and Untapped New York fans, you're going to be hearing a lot more from Gotham Center. And for those of you who are Gotham Center fans, please feel free to become an Untapped fan and reciprocal. Joe Holmes asks, are the courses online or in person? So Peter, that was going to be my first question. How do insiders or those attending today interact with the courses? What's the structure for, say, tuition and all that?
Right.
So go for it.
So the courses are they're online. They're all online. We will probably at some point look into the question of having live courses as well. But at this point, everything is digital. And we have gotten in the habit of recording those sessions so that if you miss one, you can still participate in the class. But we have designed these courses to try to be to work around professional adults' schedules, right? So these courses typically run in the evenings after close of business. They run the range of everything from 2-part lectures, sort of intense lectures, to 8-part courses that run over several weeks. Each session is 90 minutes, so there is typically a lecture that is then followed by a group discussion. The lengthier courses also have readings that the instructors provide to you. The idea is that we want this to be, sort of an analog to what you might get if you enrolled in a university course, right? These are non-credit bearing courses, but for those folks who are simply interested in learning more about a subject, right, this is the hole that we're filling there. Far more affordable than you might than what you might have to pay at your local university, but you're still getting in-depth conversations by often the leading scholar on that subject. So,
great.
I'm not sure if did I fully answer that question?
I think that sounds good to me. Joe, you can sound off and let us know if there's more information that you would need. And again, we've periodically put the link to the Gotham Center in the chat, and I'll throw it up there one more time before we sign off today. Are there any other questions from the audience about any of those? And here comes
I have a question.
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
Can I ask Susan? Susan, maybe you said this, but does Weeksville have an archive, and is that the where you're working from? Do they have their own repository of?
I am familiar with Weeksville because of Judy Wellman's book. She wrote, it's over here somewhere. Judy Wellman did a lot of background information on Weeksville and wrote a book called, oh, here it is. Sorry. She wrote a book called Brooklyn's Promised Land, which is about Weeksville. And it's a very, very deep study. Judy Wellman does a lot of the proving that a site is legitimately a historical site. So she has to do some real deep down drilling. And those houses that I think is really what I would consider the archives of it. I don't think that there is another archive specific to that, although she uses many of the New York City, the sources that are in New York City for this research. I started with that because it's a place. Also, what I learned fairly recently, the director of the Cooperstown Graduate Program, Gretchen Soren, who happens to be the author of Driving While Black, which has been quite popular. There's a documentary that, that Rick Burns did fairly recently on her book. She's the museum person who decorated the houses themselves. So each one is actually done at a different era. So really covering the range of time that it's there. But I know that's more than you asked for, but I'm pretty excited about there being that because of Judy's work, they were able to save these houses and prove that it was an important site to save, even though it's incomplete.
Neat. And I actually put a link to a very early Untapped article on Weeksville. We have a couple of posts up there about Weeksville. If those who are attending are interested in learning a little bit more from a bird's eye view about Weeksville as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's from 2012. Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a long time ago.
Wow.
Joe,
maybe Susan, you know this, but is it technically the oldest continuous sort of free Black community in the country, Weeksville?
I am pretty near positive that it is, because there are so few.
Maybe Russell, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
That's what I've heard. Yeah, I was just what I was wondering is there a particular repository? Is there a center? Is there an archive from which you are doing your work, Susan?
No, because this is only a piece of what I'm doing. So I'm starting with what Judy used for Sarah Garnett, and then my work is broader than that. I've gotten more and more interested in where things happened. So, for instance, the Carlton YMCA is another place where Sarah Garnett and her friends held meetings and suffrage meetings. And so that's part of the newer work that I'm doing.
Great. So Joe, so Mitchell actually asked, Joan Manyard was the moving force behind saving Weeksville, because Weeksville was in trouble, wasn't it? They needed funding to survive, because I also know we have an article about that.
They were, I believe, adopted as part of the. I think they're technically now part of the Parks Department. This is all sort of within the last year or so.
Yeah, very, very recently. And it's
Yeah.
Maine. Said that wrong.
Yeah, I believe that they were. I knew this firmly at one point, but I believe that they were adopted by one of the city agencies. It would have been Parks, but.
I think you're right.
And they have a beautiful, they have these preserved homes that you can see. This is in, I guess it's Crown Heights, and you can see these preserved homes from the period, and then they have this beautiful event space. And from what I understand, there's some very exciting programming that's coming on board now that they've managed to find their footing again. I think they were sort of knocked off a bit by the obviously by the crisis, so that precipitated the move, which is not unique to them, I'm sure.
Mitchell clarified New York City Department of Cultural Affairs Cultural Institutions Group. Huh. Okay.
So everyone should. I mean, these are really. It's an amazing place, and everyone should go and check it out. And yeah, so. Yeah,
it is. It's an amazing site, and for those of you who live in Brooklyn, it's I can get there in 15 minutes by bike. It's definitely worth it. It's an amazing slice of history, right in the middle of Crown Heights. It's quite awesome. And really interesting, Susan, to hear more about it in your course. Also, so Joe did ask for some clarification, back to the nuts and bolts, Peter, about how much do the courses typically cost? Don't know if you'd like to address that or.
Yes, so they run from I believe it's $75 for the 2-part courses, and then up to around $325 for the 8-part courses. There are group discounts available. If you are interested, we have run a number of specials. So if you sign up to our mailing list, we sometimes do specials in honor of Heritage Months and the like. But there is a group discount that is continuous. If you and some of your friends would like to take a course, or if you, there is also a gifting option for those of you who would like to gift a course to someone in your family, perhaps for the holidays coming up. So there's a variety of those options, and anybody that would like to get the specifics on all that can email the Gotham Center at Gotham Center. I'll just put the email in the chat rather than having you have to scribble it down quickly.
That would be great. And Pete Tannen already suggested one of the things I know, Peter, we've been talking about, which is possibly an Untapped New York Insider discount.
Absolutely. There will absolutely be a discount.
I did not mean to put you on the spot during my virtual programming, but
no, we have already discussed it internally. I just am just waiting for the code. So
yes,
you were gonna hear that from me soon.
Those of you who, and I know most of you on this talk today are insiders. I think we do have a lot of guests today as well, though. Untapped New York insiders will be getting a discount code. And I mean, it's completely and totally hand in hand, if not just bringing a better, more layered experience onto what you're getting here at Insiders. So we are thrilled to be able to partner and offer this. Do we have any other questions before we wrap up? Before I tell a slightly embarrassing story? My slightly embarrassing story, which I didn't think I was going to tell, but I'm going to tell, is for some of the insiders may know, when I do programming and presentations, I've been doing New York City research for many years, different projects, plays, comics, doing the tours now with Untapped New York. And the 2 books that literally have fallen apart on my coffee table are Gotham and Island at the Center of the World. So I was really super nervous about this presentation today, because I'm like, don't look like an ass in front of these people. So I called my mother yesterday, who does not like New York at all. They live in New Jersey. They're about 20 minutes away. They can see New Jersey from the top of the mountain. I said, Mom, I don't know if you remember, for Christmas of like 2004, you gave me Gotham and complained about how heavy it was and that it threw your back out when you wrapped it to put it under the tree. And then I said, I don't know if you remember, but for my birthday, I think in 2005, Russell, did the book come out in 2005 or 2006?
2004 it came out.
Okay, so 2005 then, my mother gave me the hardbound version of Island at the Center of the World. And she said, I saw this and it just screams you. And it changed my life. And it's changed the course of my work and my research. And I know there are a lot of people here who feel very similarly about both Gotham and Island at the Center of the World. And so I thank you for your contributions to New York City history. I thank you, Peter, for running this amazing center. And that's it. So, I mean,
well, Justin, just let me respond and say thank you. And nothing pleases me more than when someone asks me to sign a book and the book is like dog-eared and marked up and splayed, pages falling out.
Yeah.
I'll beat you to that. I have 3 copies of it. So I have a hardbound copy that sits on my shelf and doesn't get touched. I have another hardbound copy, which is really, just been through the mill. And then I bought the paperback version when I started doing the Dutch New Amsterdam tour for Untapped like 7 years ago. I just bought a paperback version, which is literally, there are pages falling out of it. There are dog ears all over it. There's highlights on it. I bring it on the tour and show people and tell them to read it. And I also start the tour with a quote of yours about the layers of history, 400 years of history in Lower Manhattan in the street grid. So,
thank you.
It's an amazing book, and I thank all of you for your work. And Ralph Lewis. Oh, hi, Ralph. How are you? He says, I carry Island at the Center with me so I can read selections of it to vaccinated friends. Oh, that's great. I love it. Any final thoughts before we wrap up, now that I've told my gushy, embarrassing story from you guys today?
Well, I'll just say, I'll just add my thanks to Russell and Susan, both of whom are fantastic scholars and have really shed incredible light on that, fascinating aspects of New York City history. And I'm delighted to be partnered with Untapped New York, which I think, is part of this mission that we all have to educate the public on the really important history of the city.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking forward to doing more events like this and sharing the variety of things that we do at the center. I try to keep it to a minimum, but just looking forward to moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Susan, Russell, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Thanks to all of you. Thanks to everybody for participating in this event. Hope to see you later in the month, next month.
Yes. You might
Yeah,
even
I will.
see me, Russell.
And vice
So
versa.
please go.
Yeah.
go-
I teach New York State history, and I'm always interested in the pieces that are not the ones that I know the best, but the
Right.
pieces that I know about the least. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for inviting us and for letting us be a part of this. I'm very grateful, and it's been a lot of fun. So thank you.
Great. Well, and again, thank all of you for your time. Before we sign off, Elizabeth Cook-Levy just put the Historic House Trust of NYC as a nonprofit that raises funds to restore some of these properties. Most of them are on NYC parkland. Many of our cultural centers are on NYC parkland with agreements with nonprofit organizations to manage them, which is correct, like Lincoln Center and Museum of Natural History. Elizabeth, if you'd like to put a link to the Historic House Trust of New York in the chat, please do. This chat does stay active even after the event is over. So once you get the recording link in a couple of minutes, the chat with all of the links in it will still be there. For those of you who are Untapped New York insiders, the recording of this will live in our archives in perpetuity, so you can access it from there as well. That usually goes up a day or two after the event. Tomorrow, I hope to see our insiders and anybody who is interested we are having a talk with the German consulate and Dr. Stefan Hohn, I believe we say his last name, who talks about the creation of the subway commuter. And it's a lot of fun. I previewed his presentation. So for those of you who are fans of the subway and New York City infrastructure, it's going to be a great talk. That's tomorrow at noon. And we will keep going. I'll see the rest of you hopefully on the High Bridge on Saturday as we walk the High Bridge in person for insiders. Thank you all. Have a really great day or afternoon or evening, wherever you are. And my thanks to all of you. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.